me? No? You didn't hit that guy.
Yeah, I called Shane. So they are going. Okay.
Thank you.
Good night, or good evening. Calling to order tonight the Committee of the Whole for Monday, February 28th, 2022. First, we have an addition to the agenda under item E, resolutions. We'll add discussion of the Women's History Month resolution, a draft of which has been circulated to council members and Mayor Jadwin. Are there any other additions or corrections to the agenda? First item tonight under presentations, we have the Director of Administrative Services will be presenting on the mission, vision, and values work that's been done at the city.
While they're getting seated, Madam Chair, if I could, over the last 2 years, you've heard me speak frequently about the fact that we were working on a refresh of Go Forward Gahanna, the city's strategic plan, which was adopted back in 2015, 2016. Wonderful goals that were identified as part of that program, many of which were not attainable because of the lack of funding that we had for many, many years. So 5, 6 years later, here we are again. Now we have issue 12. Working on a refresh of what that plan looks like is something that we have been working on for probably about the last 18 months. It has had some stops and starts in that, thanks to our friend COVID. But part of that strategic plan refresh, when we sat down and met with our consultant, whom you will meet in a minute officially here, one of the first things that came out of that discussion was you need to take a look at your mission and vision, because anytime you refresh and update your strategic plan, that's always something that should be part of that review process. We also had the discussion around the fact that most communities, most entities, whether private sector or public sector, not only have a mission statement and a vision statement, but also have an identified value set. And it is something that really brings your employees, your team members together, so that when you have a unified set of goals that are adopted, everybody understands why they're coming to work every day, and they understand the expectations and standards that they are expected to meet when they come to work and the performance of their duties, and also us as elected officials, what we're doing here as well. So this, what you're going to hear today is a little bit of a presentation on what we've been working on. I know there were a series of surveys that went out to all of the employees as well as to council over the past 18 months, but really speaking to an update of the mission statement, vision statement, and value statement. So with that, this is Marie Keister of Murphy Epson, who has been working with us patiently as we have gone through this. So I'm going to turn this over to her.
Great, thank you very much, and let me make sure you can hear me okay. Thank you so much for having me here this evening, Council. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's really been a pleasure to work with your staff and your team. When we talk about vision, mission, and values, when we say vision, what we really want to do is talk about who and what you aspire to be. And you can embody that day in and day out, but many times it's very aspirational. So you want to give yourself something that gives you that opportunity to grow and tells the community who you're all about. And your prior vision was effective of that, but since you last looked at your vision, society has changed, staff has changed, and there is a lot more interest in being very intentional in communicating how inclusive and respectful you are as a community. So this was a good opportunity to revisit those words and see what else we could do to really liven up your vision statement. Similarly, with your mission statement, again, we wanted to capture the essence of what that great foundation was in the past. And so when we surveyed your employees and you 3 different times, we asked people, do you like the vision, mission, and values, or do you think it needs refreshed? And almost overwhelmingly, we got the feedback that, yeah, it probably needs refreshed a little bit. When you start to work on, the vision is what you aspire to be, your mission is how you're going to deliver on that, how you're going to operate day in and day out. And then your values, that's where you are constantly testing, okay, when in doubt, if it's not in the mission, am I being true to our community's values? So with that as our playing field, we asked our employees and all of you 3 times, I want to say again, what they thought about the first the original vision, mission, and values. And so there were some suggestions on some words that really resonated with people, and then there were some ideas on how to make that more succinct. And at the end of the day, you want to be brief, concise, and get your point across very quickly. And so just briefly, I want to say your original vision that we started with was 21 words. And let me just say, good writing is rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and it's constantly finding ways to use fewer words to get the same point across. And I think we really achieved that. We kept the essence of what you had before, but we've strengthened it with fewer words. So with no little ado now, the new vision is to be a vibrant and diverse city where all are welcomed, respected, and inspired. So I just want to say, when we started out, we had several longer versions, and with each survey, we winnowed it down, and we were always looking for a way to strengthen that vision, but then when we gave them the different alternatives on the mission, we were also making sure we didn't duplicate words, right? So again, you want to make the most use of as few words as possible. So Gahanna's new mission statement goes from 44 words in your prior mission statement to 13 words. And the new mission is to deliver exceptional, exemplary services by being responsible, accessible, and accountable. I want to point out that we've carried forward words from your prior mission, like exceptional, responsible, accessible, and accountable. Just like with your vision, we have kept the words of welcomed and respected. So we've kept the essence of those prior foundations, but we've found a way to be more succinct. And then finally, we tested the values. 3 times we asked people, help us winnow the values. And finally, we landed on integrity, safety, respect, and service. So in summary, having been with you on this journey, I personally have been inspired by the collaboration and the creativity of the team. You know, you're constantly testing the words. You start with the big ideas, and then you're winnowing to the stronger summation of those words. And I really think through this process, we did arrive at a sound place. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Marie, can you speak a little bit to how this will play into the refresh of the strategic plan as well?
Yeah, so the go-forward plan had very, very strong strategic priorities. I think you'll see very similar priorities as we move forward. There might be some wordsmithing, again, and maybe some change in priorities of key initiatives underneath those strategic priorities. But again, this vision, mission, and values is our North Star. So as we're writing the strategic priorities with everybody's input, it will always be tested against, does this meet our vision? Are we carrying out our vision? Are these strategic priorities going to help us get there? And then our mission, are we operating in a way that's consistent with our mission as we lay out our strategic priorities and actions?
So there's no action being asked tonight. This will be part of an ongoing dialogue as we continue to work on the strategic plan with council over the coming months. This was to update you on, you received 3 surveys, as Marie has said, 3. And to update you on why you had 3 surveys and what we were doing with those, and certainly showing you the outcome of that. But I think this is the beginning of the dialogue, not a one and done.
Mrs. Angela?
Yeah, you know, this was our first vision ever, and this was back into the 1990s. And consequently, I've grown to love it. And I can understand why there are more words in this, because we really wanted to make things clear who and what we wanted to be. And this kind of, we don't potentially need that much now, and this sounds, you know, very wonderful and things, but this is because it's old and it's I think I might put it in a frame or something at some point, because it has kept us moving and moving and moving. And yours is using some of it, and I think it's moving as well.
It inspired our process. We looked back at that original vision and how you got those words on paper, and it was so critical then, because you hadn't
We had
stated it
nothing.
yet.
Yeah, we had nothing.
So thank you for that work. That really helped us.
No, it's not my work, it was a whole bunch of people's work. But I always keep it because I'm the only one left from those 90s, so.
Well done.
Here it is. Let's see what's on the back, critical success. Oh, okay, here we go. That was really nice, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor.
She's a terrific person.
The next item on tonight's agenda is a presentation on fair housing policy and an opening for discussion among council members regarding fair housing policy. I'll be presenting the slide deck similarly and speaking here, but hopefully I intend to present to my colleagues here. I know it's going to be a little bit awkward for me looking at notes and trying to also make eye contact with you. So let me start by thanking Council President and all members of Council for your work to ensure the forward progress and forward movement of Council office and the work that we've been doing. I wanted to emphasize that this has been a group project amongst all of us and a group project with other entities and other organizations. Certainly, our city's relationship with MORPC has helped move some of this policy forward. I believe when MORPC presented one of the housing presentations back in 2020, they suggested the importance of this type of policy and the values that I'm hoping to bring forward through it. A thank you to the administration and work from the Economic Development Department on work around sourcing information and on the survey for source of income discrimination, which would be a component of this. And thanks to the City Attorney Ray and to Deputy City Attorney Matt Roth, who've been working on this as well. It's really apt that we're following a presentation on vision and values. The vision of a vibrant and diverse city where all are welcomed, respected, and inspired is really the underpinning of why this legislation, I think, is important and right for Gahanna for now. I want to start by just laying some level setting and laying some foundation as to where we are, where we've come from, and why we're headed still in a direction where this policy would be potentially important to our community. So housing discrimination refers to the historical and current barriers, policies, and biases that prevent equitable access to housing. This became more pervasive following the abolition of slavery in the U.S., and there was a lot of racial segregation that happened through our history with regard to housing. Redlining, I think a lot of us have heard about redlining with mortgages that prevented people of color and Black and African American families from moving into white neighborhoods. Housing discrimination did not end with the passage of the 1968 Civil Rights Act, which is what included the Fair Housing Act. We have data that we'll go into in the next slide from the Ohio Civil Rights Commission that studied housing discrimination cases between 1988 and 2003. And there were over 2,170 cases that were filed. Much more than half of those were filed by African Americans. A study by the Housing and Urban Development HUD released in 2005 found that more and more Hispanics are facing discrimination in their housing searches. And a 2011 article by HUD asserts that 1 out of 5 times Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders receive less favorable treatment than others when they seek housing. There has been, moving forward, while discrimination on race persists, studies have found that members of the LGBTQ community are also being denied housing. In a comprehensive study done by the Fair Housing Centers of Michigan in 2007, statistics showed that out of 120 paired tests, almost 30% of same-sex couples were given higher rental rates and less encouragement to rent. In that scenario, we're talking about what's called exclusionary types of discrimination, and you'll note I have that on the slide. So there's two types of discrimination. Typically, there's exclusionary and non-exclusionary. Really, what this legislation tries to focus on is what's called exclusionary discrimination, where the practice would limit a person's access to even get into the housing that they're looking for, versus non-exclusionary, which is where they're already in the housing but are receiving bias or discrimination, even from, perhaps from their landlord or from other tenants. Other things other than identities such as race, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity are also being used to unfairly discriminate against and deny housing to people. Someone's source of income, such as whether they receive Social Security, disability, child support, or alimony income, or things such as public vouchers, have also been a recent trend for denying housing. The result of this is that it has a disparate impact on already protected classes, such as the elderly, women and mothers, people with disabilities, and racial minorities. So what can we do to undo some of the harm that is caused by housing discrimination? Fair housing policy really started with the 1968 Civil Rights Act and subsequent expansions. Originally, the Fair Housing Act prohibited housing discrimination only on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin. It was later expanded to include sex or gender, and disability and familial status. Familial status in this context, I didn't know this until I was really digging deep into this, has to do with whether someone is pregnant or expecting a child, because that would, denying a person housing based on their expected expansion of their family. Since federal law has somewhat stalled in this sense, that it's stopped with these characteristics, it's really turned over to state and local legislation to expand protections. 17 states at the state level now include protection for sexual orientation and gender identity. Ohio is not one of those currently. However, Senator Nikki Antonio from Lakewood has proposed the Equal Housing and Employment Act several times throughout her tenure. She currently has it pending again at the General Assembly, and this year, one of the things that's remarkably different is that the Ohio Realtors Association is supporting the legislation. So it may get somewhat more traction at this point, but it's not anticipated to really move forward in this makeup of this General Assembly. Source of income has also become a current trend for additional protection around housing in Central Ohio. We've heard some presentations from concerned residents and advocates that we expand protection, housing protection, on the basis of source of income. Generally speaking, I think we all probably understand that there's a lot of negative impacts of housing discrimination and what happens when you have concentrated poverty that's created by housing discrimination or continued racial segregation or other types of segregation. There's been some studies here in the Franklin County area within the last 5 to 10 years. I think with the county public health department has been able to track health disparities by zip code. And I know that that information is readily available, but zip codes with higher poverty rates, lower property values, there's a direct correlation then to health disparities, negative health outcomes, food deserts, and educational disparities as well. I wanted to touch on something that I think is really important to the conversation is that there's this concept in international human rights and dating back in American history back to 1944, when FDR declared the right to housing in his second Bill of Rights speech as a freestanding human right. The idea that this is something really critical to people's existence. We're not talking about things that maybe there should be a bit more discretion over, or perhaps more flexibility on. The ability of someone to obtain housing, stable housing, is a really critical, basic need. It's probably what Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think it's one of the foundational pieces of that. When you have a positive and effective fair housing policy, the hope then is that you would be able to see diverse and integrated communities. We would have qualified buyers and tenants in quality, stable housing, and it would encourage job creation and employers to locate here. Ohio Business Competes is an organization made up of hundreds of companies, big and small, all across the state of Ohio, that have come together to promote and seek and advocate for specifically LGBT non-discrimination policies, because it's frankly good for business. Companies as big as L Brands and Bob Evans and Ohio Health, I believe, are all members of Ohio Business Competes. So why here, why now? Why does this matter in a place like Gahanna in Ohio in 2022? Discrimination is still happening across Ohio. The Ohio Housing Finance Agency conducted a study of cases in 2020, cases closed in 2020, not cases filed. There were 436 cases closed in 2020. And you can see on this slide that the breakdown of what those claims were based on. Ohio does not track I think there's a discrepancy in whether or not Ohio Civil Rights Commission is accepting cases based on sexual orientation and gender identity, and there's still a gap in that in enforcement in that area in particular. And certainly this doesn't include source of income, because that's not yet a state level policy. While this does impact, I think, owners as well, and certainly we've seen historical discrimination with purchasing homes, the Ohio Realtors Association and the National Association of Realtors has made some significant strides in preventing discrimination from happening in a buying context. So what I wanted to focus on is just a little bit about the rental landscape here in Gahanna. An estimate from the city, from the Director of Planning, estimated about 13,000 rental housing units in the city, with almost 30% of those being tenant occupied. So why local? Those of us who are sitting up here, I think, understand why local matters, and why local government is one of the most important forms of government. We can be more responsive to the needs and immediate questions from our constituents, and we can also tailor policies that really best reflect the requests and the needs of our community. I also think that at a local level, we have an ability to craft something that's more around a restorative justice model, something that will really help build on education and alternative dispute resolution, rather than sort of swift punishment or criminal consequence, which I think is an easier enforcement mechanism, but one that I don't think achieves desired outcomes. As the region feels pressure from population growth, there is a push from a lot of organizations in our area that specialize in housing to establish proactive protections. The Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio supports the passage of resolutions of ordinances such as these. And we've heard support from WARPC as well. There's also some consistency, I think, in the value to having consistency. Among our business community, we've heard time and time again, especially from development department, that businesses want to know what to expect, developers want to know what to expect. And I think that as communities around us have come online with these types of protections, it makes sense to create an even landscape across the playing field. Source of income is being discussed and passed in communities across Central Ohio, including Reynoldsburg, Worthington, and others. From a strictly LGBT, sexual orientation, gender identity, non-discrimination perspective, we are behind the region in passing anything with regard to that. Hilliard has been working on that. Upper Arlington, Reynoldsburg passed it a couple years ago. So a lot of our neighbors are passing the expanded non-discrimination protections. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, I had given a heads up of some of this that I've been working on, is that I want to make sure that we're not unfairly disadvantaging landlords or owners in this process. When I spoke with Councilwoman Shayla Favor, who had been the influencer and lead behind Housing for All legislation in Columbus, she talked to me about some of the objections that they had gotten from the Columbus, it was their landlord association, rental association. One of the issues that that landlords were concerned about was whether or not source of income protection would require them to rent to tenants who couldn't afford to rent there. That is not a goal of this legislation. The goal of the legislation is to make sure that qualified tenants are matched appropriately to landlords, and that landlords would not be required to rent to somebody with illegal, unstable, or insufficient income. There's some development to make sure that this there would be the legislation that is the model legislation that we're looking at, the Buffalo, New York ordinance that I mentioned to colleagues, includes a section on landlord rights as well. Fair housing policy would not prevent a landlord from refusing to rent to tenants with poor credit or eviction history, so long as those refusals are applied equally. That's an important aspect to this, is that if a landlord has I'm not going to rent to somebody with below a 620 credit score, that's applied fairly across the board. They don't make exceptions for some tenants but not others, because that can lead to a pattern of discrimination. Fair housing policy also does not deprive a landlord of a legal eviction process. We want to emphasize that this would not curtail any rights that a landlord has to evict a tenant. Similarly, a landlord can continue to deny housing for other legal reasons, such as occupancy limits would be exceeded by the size of the family. And fair housing policy does allow personal discretion when subletting in your own home. I think that's an important aspect of this legislation as well to clarify. So where are we in next steps? So far, what's been completed is that there's been a survey of local ordinances, not just from Central Ohio, but across the nation. We've looked at Alameda, California. We've looked at Buffalo. We've looked at Ann Arbor, probably a half a dozen others that we've reviewed to see how broad their scope is, how does it fit with the landscape of maybe what we're looking to do, what resources do we have available for enforcement, et cetera. From reviewing that, Attorney Matt Roth, Deputy City Attorney Matt Roth, and I, and City Attorney Ray Malarski thought that the Buffalo, New York ordinance was a good model to start with. Certainly not verbatim, certainly not exact, because I think there's some enforcement tools that we want to change from Buffalo. But it looks like the Buffalo, New York ordinance is a pretty positive one to start with. The organization is good, the way it lays out the Landlord's Rights section, the way it has some definitions included. Overall, that Buffalo ordinance we thought was a really nice model. I've also mentioned that we have the city has a rental survey in progress. Economic Development Director Nate Strum and I have been communicating a little bit about that. Director Strum indicates that he's got a list, an email distribution list ready to go for that, and that there were some tweaks, maybe some additions to that, but otherwise it hopefully should be going out here this week. Yes, okay. I noticed in some of my research that there may be some opportunities for funding enforcement, and I think that we can continue to explore that, whether there's some grant opportunities. The enforcement that is being discussed and considered at present would be the creation of a commission, kind of like what we just did with the Property Appeals Board, a 3-member fair housing commission. The hope would be, though, that a community liaison, a fair housing officer would be the kind of gatekeeper and sort of first stop to fielding potential complaints or concerns that were registered by tenants. The idea is that fair housing officer would try to bring some type of resolution potentially, would be trained in mediation to help mediate the potential dispute between the tenant and the landlord, and could also screen out claims that maybe didn't have a basis or wouldn't meet kind of a prima facie definition of discrimination in this setting. If it was unsuccessful in early resolution, the idea then would be kind of like with our Property Appeals Board, that case would then be presented to a Fair Housing Commission, and a Fair Housing Commission would potentially enforce through some type of administrative remedy, financial type of remedy. So from here, discussion, I think, is really critical. Feedback that you have, what things that do you want to make sure that we see, do we not want to see? Your thoughts so that Matt and I can move forward with drafting this legislation and getting it presented to you for your thoughts and review. Once that legislation is completed, we would want to engage in community education and engagement. Kind of like what we're doing here tonight. This presentation really is for my colleagues, but clearly being broadcast as well to hopefully bring the community up to speed on what I'm hoping to do and where we hope to go with this. And then there'd been some discussion too that we would, since we already have a rental registration process in place, that this could easily be fit into informing and educating landlords through that rental registration process. That this would all be part of that vision of making Gahanna in a welcoming and safe place for all. And encouraging landlords to be proud of their participation in this fair housing process. All right.
Is that it?
That's it.
Good job.
Yes, please. The floor is open.
Marissa, I want to echo what Councilman Schnetzer just said. Great job. I don't think in all the years that I've been serving the county, I don't think I've sat through one presentation that actually summarized very well the fair housing, where it was, where it is today, where it's going. So I really deeply thank you for that. Wanted to thank, I know that you've been working with the mayor and her staff, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for that time. And I look forward to, the creation of this legislation. Actually, the devil's going to be in the details on how we do it. One of the things that I really like, and I know this is something that you and I share, is not making enforcement punitive. And you really sold me at that on the day one about that. So I can't wait to see how that process works. But thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a question. Has anybody here ever worked in in this type of apartment type things? Anybody on our council?
I've handled eviction hearings. It's the closest I've
Well,
gotten.
I worked for 12 years in it, so I can understand a little bit better why, people want to make money because they own these apartments. And it typically isn't to just do that haphazardly. And I worked with people with disabilities, getting them apartments, and started with 2 pages and ended up with a $4 million project. So I understand apartments. I also mentioned at Morpsey, how are we supposed to be handling the houses that are rented? Because we started a housing rental situation where we were going to asking fees and things like that, and it didn't work. It was brought out, we stopped doing it because we couldn't do it. It was not there. So I want to bring those subjects up because I think, apartments themselves, I've worked with the good, the bad, and the really ugly ones, all right? And it's difficult to do that. But we don't even have much space here to do these things. For instance, I bet that we don't have more than 98%, I would say 98% of all apartments, if not 100%, are already, people are living there. So, and they don't seem to have any trouble. I've never heard any problems with that. Okay, and again, I worked in the entire Franklin County. So I think there are so many things in here that I do like. I think that it's wonderful that we want this, but I just don't quite understand. We're not going to be able to build that much more, from what I'm saying. I think we need workforce type things too. I believe in all those things, but I'm just questioning, is this really necessary when we have, Nancy, did you say that you saw, there were like 16 houses for sale now in our city?
Today.
Okay, 16, that's like nothing. And
Only 2 were not in contract.
oh, yeah, okay, so there's actually 2 then that are there. So we don't have many people coming in here, but will tell you this, that the people that have come here stay here because they love it here, and it's because we love our neighbors as ourselves. And that's exactly what we should be doing. And I live in my particular area. I have many, many people that are not of the same race as I am. It doesn't matter. We love our neighbors as ourselves. And I just question the fact that, there might be a whole lot of money that would have to go through this if you're going to hire somebody to do this, that, how would we get through that, Marissa? What do you think your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, well, I want to go back to one of the things that you mentioned was this was speaking to apartments. I want to clarify that of the 3,750 units, approximately 600 of those are single family. I'm not proposing exclusions to single family rental units. And in fact, I think that those are potentially some of the more, those tend to be owned by smaller property owners who just may not understand. I think one of the things that's really, that happens in discrimination cases today primarily is that intent might be neutral, but the effect is, the impact is disparate. And so having a system in place where we can make sure that we're educating landlords, educating people who just may not know that they should be accepting certain types of income, for example, that they should accept SSDI as a basis for, as part of their calculation and accept in qualifying a tenant. That's the real hope here, is that there's a source, that there's an education component that reaches out and makes contact with our landlord community. As far as I understand too, the rental registration process is in full swing. It was edited significantly from the prior administration, but it is in full swing, and I believe it applies to not just apartments, but it applies to those rental houses as well. I've never heard a limitation on that. As far as costs go, it's certainly a concern. You know, with our property appeals board, I don't recall a conversation about costs coming up, but this would be a similarly unpaid commission that we have so many residents that want to serve their community. I wouldn't anticipate that we would have so many complaints that it would cause a significant financial burden to the community, but we can definitely make sure that we have a financial assessment. Maybe I can work with Director of Finance on that going forward as well. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to commend you on a very well-constructed presentation. I know it's no fun to sit up there and kind of be talking without a dialogue, so good job.
Thanks.
Just two questions, and both of them are process oriented or process related. I guess the first is regarding, so as we move through this, kind of next steps, one would just be if we could have some sort of data or statistics. I see in the presentation there's mention of a survey and some feedback. I don't know if that'll be the extent of it, but I guess really the question that I have is to what extent to what degree does this problem exist in Gahanna? I think that's the question that we ultimately need to answer first. Like if you kind of think about it as a flow chart, it's identifying and quantifying the problem. And then the next one, I would just ask if we have an opportunity for some input from the administration. Again, doesn't have to be now, but as we work through, because I assume there will be some staffing resources required. And in fact, in your presentation, there was reference to perhaps a community fair housing officer. So I just want to make sure again that I'm wrapping my head entirely around the problem and then how we propose to how to rectify it. So if it helps, I'll provide an example of recent programs that we have implemented. Obviously, the sidewalk program, it's been a long time in the making, but we received, resident concerns through the years, both on a standalone basis and through the budget public comment period. And I believe we have a member of the audience, Ms. Hossman. I believe you've spoken about sidewalks before. I think it was your granddaughter as you were pushing her in a stroller. You had some issues with bumps in the sidewalks. I know that was many years ago, so nothing moves quite as fast as government, right? But nonetheless, we had resident concerns. We dispatched the administration to go out and quantify it. They came back and they said there are X number of sidewalks that are deficient and failing that did not meet ADA compliance. And then they surveyed, as you have done here, they've surveyed what some other programs in Central Ohio were. They assessed the costs, and then they proposed those to council, and at that point, council had a decision to make. So that's kind of the framework, I guess, I'm kind of looking for here. So again, great job. Looking forward to moving through it, but just a couple of lingering questions there.
Perfect.
I have another thing. We're not Buffalo, we're not Michigan, we're not California. We're the Central Ohio. And I think the history of our community, and again, I'm not against all of this, but our history is one that African Americans were there, with their country club, and so we've embraced all of those things, and I don't know of many things that have come across the table that have said, boy, we have a real problem with this. And I think Mike, you were kind of saying that, what is do we have a problem with this or don't we? Because our apartments, I think, are pretty much full, and I don't see, are there fights or things like that, or people being kicked out? Well, I don't know. I have not heard anything of that thing, and so, I mean, is it possible that we're one of those unique communities that don't have this problem? I don't know. You mentioned that you had some constituents who had come to you, I think, about it. I don't know who those constituents are or how many they are. Perhaps there's something going on here that I'm not aware of, which could definitely be possible, but.
I'll see if the Ohio Housing Finance Agency can provide a breakdown by zip code, and we can look into that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Generally speaking, I was looking at Ohio as a whole, and certainly was able to locate that data more readily, but we can definitely pull some zip code data if it's available.
Well, and the other thing is, we have HUD. We have HUD places in our region, okay? And actually, when I was in Washington, we talked about stuff in terms of housing, and HUD said a lot of people don't even know that they can go there to get help. So, if there's anything more on that, so.
Okay, perfect.
But thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Padova.
Thank you so much for this. It was really great information, and you did a really great job, as most everybody here has mentioned. I do think that it is amazing that there are a lot of residents that stay in Gahanna and stay in, if they're able to get a rental here or they stay here for a long time. The thing that I really am more passionate about with this is the source of income discrimination. That is very important, and it's not something, maybe there haven't been issues in the past, but it's something that I feel we should have in place so that it is not an issue in the future. For me, it's always the kids and investing in our community in that way, and if we were able to do something to help one mother to get a home and get our kids in a good school district, it could change a lot of lives. So thank you for your presentation. It was very great.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
All right, we'll have this back on the agenda, I think, for Committee of the Whole, the 14th of March. All right, next on the agenda tonight is under item C2, Council Rules of Procedure. Let me turn this over to Council President Stephen Renner to give us an update on kind of where we are and what the items are for discussion.
Thank you. So we originally had one question that was before us, and now we have two on our council, our own rules of procedure. The first one, I think everybody may recall, is what are we going to do? How do we modify our rules in order to handle electronic communication for our regular agenda? We had asked Pam to reach out and find out what the surrounding area how they may be handling that. Pam did make a chart, and she did pass these out. Pam, would you like to actually talk about this?
Yes. I received 18 replies, and the first question asked was whether or not they were hybrid, virtual, or in person. And there's one virtual community, 3 hybrid, and 14 in-person communities. The next question asked was regarding the email correspondence, whether or not it was read into their minutes. I received 15 replies, and it's 8 of them said no, they do not read it into their minutes. 7 of them said yes, but there are stipulations. Some of those stipulations are if it goes to all of council, it is read into the minutes. If it goes to an individual council person, it is not read into the minutes. And if the person has not provided their name or address, it is not, written into the minutes or read into the minutes. The next question was whether or not they provided speaker slips available online. And out of those communities, 17 responses, only 3 have it online. They print it, fill it out, and email it back to the clerk's office. 14 communities, it is not available online. I believe that with the system that we have on our webpage, I know that we can add PDFs. It's something that we could add as a PDF, a fillable form that could be emailed to council, or council office, excuse me. The next item that I was asked to look into was the technology available through Granicus. That platform is called e-comment, and it is an online participation platform during public meetings. And I spoke to April, the previous clerk, and she said it was looked into, but it was the decision that was the direction that was not made to go. I can look further into whether or not you want some type of FAQ added with the questions that residents are asking. I would just need more time to do that.
Right. Okay, and so just for the sake of clarity, you were talking about the hybrid communities, and why is that important to actually talk about?
Some of those communities are allowing the public, if they are hybrid, to participate during the meeting, like we did when we were hybrid or virtual.
Right, okay.
Because they sit in the waiting room and then their camera's turned on and their microphone is turned on when it's time for them to speak. They're still allowed the 3 minutes, and that's how these communities are still working.
Good. So instead of having, forcing people to actually come down to a physical location, these 3 communities are actually still, you said 3 or 2?
3.
Well, 1, I'm sorry.
Well, one is totally virtual. The other 3 are hybrid. They actually have their formal meetings in person, and then they have their committee-type meetings online.
Okay, interesting. All right, so this is really good information. Any questions from council members about this data?
Could you, when we come back to talk about this again, could we have cost information for the e-comment feature on Granicus? And then I was very interested in the information from Lima. If Lima would be willing to share if they have a written policy so that we could look at their actual written policy on this and their speaker slip.
Okay.
I'd be interested in seeing that.
I did receive, and it was later this evening, and I haven't had a chance to finish reading it, from North Ridgeville. They have a policy. I will send that to you tomorrow.
Okay. Mr. Weaver, or Mr. Renner, did you have anything else?
No, not on this. The only other thing is I would like to actually push to wrap up our council rules of procedure on the 14th of March, so therefore we can actually take voting action on March 21st, and so we'll be done with this aspect. This.
Mr. Schnetzer's not going to be present on the 14th, so.
Okay.
he-
I could type up my thoughts if that works.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be wonderful.
We
Thank
wouldn't
you.
vote until the 21st, so, okay.
All right, so that's on handling electronic communication at regular agenda meetings. The second item is that I ran into the fact that as council president or any president doesn't have the authority to actually change the agenda, or I should say add additional items or categories, if you will. And I wanted to actually put forth that maybe that is something that we want to add into our rules of procedure. I don't know if people, if you want to go so far as to be able to, allow a council president to add an agenda item or a category, or do you want it to actually be specific to something? As the comments that I made at our last meeting, or our last regular meeting, that I was actually searching for a way to actually add a category item that says other committees and outside organizations. Now, the phrasing of that is actually, don't hold me to it, but that is the general thought.
Could we have, I believe the way it's laid out in council rules currently is that there is a rule that specifies the agenda outline. And so perhaps maybe we just need to amend that rule to create a model agenda, a new model agenda.
Okay. And again, my intention is on the 14th is to bring forward a summation of everybody's comments and then bring forth specific action that we can actually talk about and vote on the 21st.
Anyone else? Okay. Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. President. I think I'm good with that plan. I think that'll allow for me personally to take some of this research. Thank you to our interim clerk for getting us answers to those questions and shape that into some sort of proposed rule. And so I'm absolutely happy moving forward on the 14th.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver.
That's all I have.
All right.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Item D, items from the Department of Finance. Are you going to take these in order on the agenda, or?
Yes, and we do have, I believe, a correction. For the first item, I believe it is, what my, thank you. So for the first ordinance that talks about repeal and replace, since it is being remunerated, I believe the first item would just be a repeal. So it'll be similar to the second action item where we're just repealing those sections of code.
So ordinance 0008, 2022, we'll need to amend that at council meeting next week to repeal part 1 of the administrative code. Is that right?
Right, those particular sections that are listed in there.
Okay.
And then for the second ordinance 0009, no updates there unless council had any questions about that old code that we are repealing also. And then mainly wanted to focus on the last item, 0010, just talking about the policy. I did receive one question, which was, based on these thresholds, what would council be kind of approving in addition to appropriations? What I did was a quick run through the check register and identified that with these current thresholds, the way they are, approximately 74% of the expenditures would come before council in addition to the approval of the appropriation ordinance. So just wanted to check and see if there are any questions about the information provided, any additional questions on the thresholds, anything else that you might have in mind regarding the new policy.
Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, thank you. One question as it relates to the federal uniform guidance. On the sort of recap of the changes to the threshold, you indicated that we were going with the maximum limits there. And just given that this is not my area of expertise, was there a reason for going with the maximum rather than other limits provided in there? Or is it a range they give?
They did not give a range. They
Okay.
just say this is as high as you can go. So that was kind of where we set the bar to see what was the comfort level based on the type of transactions that we have. So noting those as, this is as high as you can go, at what limits? Do you feel more comfortable, or are you comfortable with those limits?
And then, if I may, I'm sorry, was there any look at surrounding communities that also use the federal uniform guidance? I'm assuming that the federal uniform guidance that's in the name, that this is pretty standard.
Yeah, so we did look at a couple, actually. We looked at Grove City, New Albany, Reynoldsburg, Westerville, Whitehall, Worthington, and the limits are all over the place. And they also have varying approval thresholds, meaning that not everything may go to council. And there were some policies that were silent on threshold because they had a separate purchasing committee, and those procedures kind of lived in there. So some policies had them, some policies didn't. Some of them deferred to a procedure rather than a policy. And some had committees or separate individuals who looked at those purchases rather than going to council.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And thanks for all your efforts on this.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Renner?
Yeah, thank you. I said this last time, but I want to say it again just for everybody's edification. This chart, this decision tree is the key to understanding all of this. So please, for everybody that's here, people who are watching maybe later, please look at this code. Please look at this decision tree, because this is paramount to the repeal of these ordinances, or to at least understanding. And I love this tree, so.
Great.
But thank you.
You're welcome.
It's not green, though. It's blue and yellow.
No, but it's the Gahanna colors, right?
Let me ask a question on that note, just regarding the tree. The diamond in the second column, second row, roughly, where it says, is the purchase less than $250,000? Is that's assuming that the new procurement policy limits are 250, or am I misunderstanding?
Yes, I created this based on how the current policy is laid
Yeah.
out.
So my thoughts on this are that with we talked briefly, kind of offline, that the $250,000 threshold is set by the federal government with a budget that is far different than the budget of the city of Gahanna. And as a percentage of our community, it's a very high dollar number.
Well, just to kind of they basically set this for all the local governments that are going to be using these federal dollars.
Okay.
So it's not based on their budget. It's based on kind of how they're looking at communities across the United States that use funding.
Okay.
Now, granted, there are some very large cities out there that obviously have a much larger budget than we do, but it's not based on
Federal budget.
It's based on those that are using those federal dollars.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Where I lean is I am still more comfortable with a lower threshold than that, just because it is such a significant percentage of the city budget. I like how you laid out that information to us in terms of the percentage of the sum of payments. Could you maybe explain that chart briefly?
The one that I sent out that broke down the check register?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically what I did was I laid in varying amounts. So greater than 10,000, greater than 50,000, greater than 250,000. And using those thresholds, thank you, determine that based on the thresholds that are currently in the suggested policy, what percentage of that total would council be authorizing? Again, everything is authorized by council through appropriations, but this would be things that would come back specifically to council, and it roughly equates to about 74%. of the expenditures. Now, granted, that wasn't a detailed analysis, so I didn't look for items that might be exempted for one reason or another. I also didn't look at maybe some smaller checks that were issued that were actually part of a larger project. So there is some wiggle room in there, but I don't think it would significantly change that percentage.
Mr. Schnetzer.
Madam Chair, thank you. Ms. Burry, so you had talked about on the front end with the budget appropriations as well as the size of these disbursements that would be flagged to come back before council. Can you comment on the back end? I believe, are we still sending our expenditures to the state of Ohio to be posted online? Does that still occur?
So we have not been using the checkbook.
Okay,
I've been short-staffed.
sure.
So it will be picked up again at some point.
Got it.
I'm not a large fan because they're missing the other side of the equation.
Okay,
They're capturing those expenditures, but they're not capturing our revenue.
okay.
So I've never been a huge fan of the system. I understand the benefit to it and have never had a problem putting it out there.
Sure.
But I think if they're going to try to capture information to report out, they should be capturing both sides.
And then how about the audit process? Is there any component of that that would be catching some of these items?
As part of the audit process,
Yeah,
everything's sampled.
okay,
But they do look specifically at compliance. So if this policy were adopted, that's how they would base their compliance testing to make sure that if within this threshold it said that it needed to go to council, that it was in fact going to council.
Okay.
Again, it would be all sample driven. But yes, they do test. Not only are they for proper public purpose, is all the documentation there, accuracy, all those audit check boxes, but they're also looking at, are we complying with our policies and Ohio Revised Code?
okay. Thank you.
Just to follow back up on the check register breakdown that you gave us. I know you gave it to us by total dollar amount. What about, would numbers of transactions be an outrageous ask?
No, and I probably, actually, if you give me a minute, I can probably pull that up and see how many transactions are in there. I won't, it'll take me a little time to do the breakdown by the threshold, but just in total. In total, there's 3,684 transactions.
3,684.
And that was just for 2021.
So you wouldn't be able to tell us tonight easily how many of those are over $100,000 or under?
Could potentially. So there's let me see if I can get the percentages. So approximately 2% would fall within those high dollar ranges.
Over 100,000 roughly?
Yes.
Or- Okay. So like 70 transactions total? If I'm moving
Right about
decimal-
60.
Okay. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, the current, is there a current threshold today?
So basically, only if it requires to be bid. And then there's inconsistency and unclarity as far as professional services. That's the other point of this policy, is we haven't been consistent because the current policy is not easily understandable what you're supposed to do if it falls within that exception of professional services. So it would be hard to kind of identify what comes now because we're kind of inconsistent in how we're applying the current policy.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? Okay. So this will be on for second reading and adoption, I believe. It's already been on for first reading. So there will need to be an amendment on the 0008 ordinance, but otherwise, these three ordinances will move forward for second reading and adoption on, or vote on Monday, the 7th. Okay, thank you, Director Burry. Section E, items from council office, a liquor permit request, 2022-0056. Madam Clerk?
Yes, ma'am. We have 2 liquor permit requests that have been sent to PD, and they have no objections to either one. The first one is for Bob Evans Restaurant on Morrison Road, requesting a D1 permit. The second permit request is for RBD Restaurants on Granville Street, requesting a D1, D2, and D3 permit.
All right, any discussion?
Is there any from the chief?
No objections, one's a transfer and the other's just.
Thank you.
All right, that'll be on for, we don't have any objection.
That is
So if there's
correct,
no
as long as-
objection from council, you can
Yes, ma'am.
move forward. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, the last item on tonight's agenda, and excuse me, I misspoke earlier, I said the resolution would be item E, but item F, resolutions, we have a drafted resolution for Women's History Month. Apologies that this did not make it onto the agenda ahead of publication. Thank you to Pam for obtaining a model resolution that we then edited, and thank you to Amanda Ferguson at the Ohio Herb Center for her research on specific connection to women of Gahanna, and specifically the herb ladies, Jane Bunning Giroux, Lucy Seeds, Ruth Rauchenstein, Trudy Miller, and Ruth Wilk. I know that Nancy had an edit that Councilwoman McGregor recommended striking the fourth whereas clause as it was potentially redundant with language later on in the resolution. Any other discussion, suggestions, comments?
The only thing I would say is it's really long. It should be about 6 or 7 whereas. Nobody is going to read all.
I understand.
And not that it's not important.
I
I'm not
gave her
saying
that lesson earlier.
I'm not saying that all these things aren't important, but I'm just saying that nobody's going to read this, and it's just too long.
I appreciate the feedback, yeah. It was a struggle to maintain some consistency with the model resolution, and happy, maybe I don't need to worry about doing that going forward. Okay.
Really. No, I would say not. If that's this long, I say not.
All right. Any other comments, edits? Nope. All right, hearing none. We're adjourned. Thank you.
And then Kevin, Pam, you'll just give me the thumbs up when you all are ready to go. We're good?
Do we
Okay.
need to trade? Should we trade these?
Did the entire budget from there.
I was thinking the same thing. Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, I think that's.
They're having finance
I knew there'd be
committee.
a 3 million, so. It's kind of interesting.
When I worked there,
Tell,
it actually caught on fire.
thought we were finished, actually.
Time when I
Forgot
was
about the next thing.
It's such a beautiful
But
setting.
then it was back open like the next day, so I feel like when it's yeah, it is.
I woke up at 4 o'clock and laid
Patio
back on
there
the
is
feet.
very nice.
Wish I could remember this.
Because of these meetings.
I always say that.
So Jennifer Six, how are you? How are you?
He said he didn't
Happy
want to
to be
bang the
here?
gavel,
Yeah, I didn't want to gavel anybody.
so you're going to deal with that.
All right, so let's commence Finance Committee for February 28th, 2022. We have one item on the agenda this evening. It's a discussion item for the long-term capital improvement plan. We have a guest today. I will turn it over to the mayor for a brief introduction.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Another piece of the puzzle we've been talking about in terms of kind of creating the roadmap for how we will move forward for the city of Gahanna is the development of a long-term capital improvement plan. As you all know, for many years, we have used CNA's, capital needs assessments, really as a precursor or placeholder for the creation of a long-term capital improvement plan, or CIP for short. Really what the CIP will do is, as Ms. Six is going to kind of walk us through what a CIP is and how that will work, but in short, really what the CIP will do for us is to create that roadmap for us, taking all of our capital needs, everything from roads, sidewalks, streetlights, facilities, all of those capital projects, parks, trails, and prioritize them and create the roadmap that we will follow year after year as we go through our budgeting process. So again, the CNAs were kind of a precursor to that, and we're always intended to move into something like this, but we're finally doing it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to a face that might be familiar to you from the computer screen over the last 2 years, Jennifer Six, who had been working with us as our development consultant from Insight Advisory Group, and is now working with us in the capacity of really spearheading this project for us. Ms. Six?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Chairman, good evening, Council. My name is Jennifer Six. I'm the president of Insight Advisory Group. I've had the pleasure of working with this administration since 2020.
Could you get your microphone? Yeah.
Is that better? Sorry. I've had the pleasure of working with the administration and council for a couple of years now as interim economic development director, and I'm thrilled to be before you this evening to talk about capital improvement planning. Not to purport that you all know or don't know what a capital improvement plan is, specific to the city of Gahanna, I'd like to go through a couple of the points on what a capital improvement plan is and how it affects the city of Gahanna as we move forward. As Mayor said, this is a roadmap. A typical capital improvement plan is a multi-year fiscal management plan. In the case of the city of Gahanna, this will be a 10 to 20-year plan. And the reason that you do a capital improvement plan is to establish development areas and coordinating projects within those development areas, but also establishing timelines on what makes the most sense, because obviously you have some finances and some challenges as you move forward when you have a lot of plans. Right now we have a couple $100 million worth of improvements in the pipeline, and it's going to be important to pave the path for alternate funding options. And so part of the capital improvement plan will also identify funding sources that match up with timelines so that we can go after grant funding and be eligible for those when those grant applications open. Typically included in a capital improvement plan are items such as public land, public buildings, infrastructure, and then other major equipment. And these are major non-recurring expenditures, and they are ranked by priority, how they fit into the schedule, what their cost is, and what the financial resources are that will support those projects. Now, I want to stop right there and talk to you about the strategic plan and how it relates to the capital improvement plan. The strategic plan, or the Go Forward Gahanna plan, those entities are those key initiatives and those strategic priorities that are kind of like the 10,000-foot overview, and they will outline certain initiatives that will be key to us working on the capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plan will slip in and support the strategic plan, but our capital improvement plan will be much more detailed, much more in the weeds, and will have budget line items attached to it, as well as timelines. So the question, why do a capital improvement plan? The purpose is really to address a couple of things. One, aging infrastructure. Obviously, we know we have a couple of key initiatives under aging infrastructure, but also ensuring the timely repair and replacement of that aging infrastructure. Also, from a public perception standpoint and community engagement, this also provides some certainty to residents and businesses as well as developers that things are happening in the city and they are in an orderly fashion so that we can help manage growth as we move forward. It also identifies the most economical means to financing these improvements, AKA a financial plan that we can put together so that we understand the ramifications of funding, bonding, grants, other initiatives that we would be going after. One of the key components of a capital improvement plan is public input, and this capital improvement plan will provide an avenue for that because we will be taking these ideas and information out to the public and asking for their feedback. It also eliminates sharp increases in tax rates so that you don't have one of those, oh my goodness moments where we need to immediately increase taxes. And I go back to the 20-year plan that Issue 12 brought forward. We want to be mindful of what the residents already passed and making sure that we can adhere to what we told them that we were going to do. It also ensures growth and development. We have a land use plan, we have a strategic plan, we have a capital improvement plan, we have a comp plan, we have a lot of plans. And what the capital improvement plan will do is make sure that we work with development and planning, as well as building and engineering to make sure that our development is consistent with what's in the capital improvement plan. And we're looking at how to balance everything out within the city's funding resources. Basically, what this will do is define a pathway for whatever that managed growth looks like. And public improvement or public engagement, as you probably know, is critical when you go after funding sources. So by automatically including public workshops in this, we have already checked the box for that public engagement when we go after federal or state funding. I'd like to talk to you about a couple of categories for capital expenditures. When we look at capital improvement plans, purchases of major equipment. So this would be for Parks and Rec, other large vehicles, computers, land acquisition. When we talk to Director Strom and the Development Department on what makes the most sense for a land acquisition strategy as we start to continue to grow. Are we looking at additional open space, public buildings, roads, industrial sites? Obviously, you've spent a lot of time on your facilities, and you're going through those workshops right now on how important it is to have a new police station, new ops center, comms, and city hall. Also, the construction, expansion, and major renovation of other public buildings and infrastructure. So as we move forward for the plan, we will be identifying what those are and how much they cost. We've been working on this for a few months, and I wanted to let you know that the work that we've already performed to date would include the review of all the capital needs assessment requests. We have already interviewed the mayor and department heads. We've reviewed the land use plan, the 20-year plan, and we've incorporated all of this data into a comprehensive spreadsheet to develop the baseline. And we've also reviewed and discussed certain planning areas, because obviously you have community reinvestment areas, you also have TIF districts, and you have wards. So what we've tried to do is identify planning areas that make the most sense. We're going to take this one step further, because what we want to do is look at developable land and buildings in a particular area, pair it up with what development and planning are also working on, so that we're looking at also responsible growth, not just managed growth. What makes sense? If we're already going to target an area for acquisition and development, well, let's also recognize that that's an area that also needs street repair or replacement, sidewalks, and streetlights. And that way you really look at a comprehensive program in a particular area of the city. We have already identified existing projects by type and by rating, specifically on street ratings and how that looks. We have not made any decisions on what should take priority, what should happen next, because what will happen is that facilities plan, once these workshops are all done, that'll be rolled into the capital improvement plan. But additionally, we're going to go back to each department head, and we're going to walk through what projects already took place, what are off the table, and then really dive into what these projects looks like, and then we can put a cost to that. We're looking to create an actionable plan, not just an inventory. And like Mayor said, this will be a roadmap that we can continue to monitor, measure, and evaluate, specifically if there's corrective action needed as we go through. So it's definitely an iterative process. It's not a document that's going to sit there. It's going to be a document that hopefully finance, development, planning, as well as building and engineering will be able to use on a consistent basis. We've established a draft timeline in order to meet the requirements prior to the next budget cycle. Our plan is to have everything adopted by this council no later than October, so that you can begin to prepare for the budgets for 2023. Work that will begin now, additional department meetings, refining and prioritizing the projects, and then finalizing the development areas. And we will be categorizing the work, and then we can help to rank and prioritize, as well as establish funding sources with these department heads. In June, we should have draft documents already prepared, maps finalized, and we will be working with the administration and this council to secure locations and dates for those public meetings. And then we can help walk you through the agenda, because obviously we'd like you to be part of that process, as I'm sure your constituents will have some questions as well. So we want to make sure that you stay informed. In June and July, we anticipate council workshops. July and August, additional community discussions as needed, soliciting additional feedback, and then consolidating all those inputs into the document. September, we plan to start to introduce this for legislation before this body. And obviously, this can move a week or two in either direction, but we want to make sure that we are complete and ready to go by October. I'm a big fan of quotes, and I came across this and kept coming across it, and Peter Drucker is one of my favorites. But when we talk about not being in alignment or not having a plan in place, and the best way to predict your future is to create it, there's a lot of development in Central Ohio and around the state Now's the time that we can plan for responsible managed growth, go after funding sources to complete all the projects that we have in the pipeline. And I look forward to continuing to work with you this year.
Thank you, Ms. Six. Before turning it over to council, I just want to make a couple of key points here. First is the fundamental question of, I guess, why now? And I believe Director Burry has mentioned this a couple of times in passing. Or I guess the question could also be rephrased, why haven't we done this already? And it was a lack of funding or a lack of dedicated funding. And so obviously with the passage of issue 12 a couple of years ago, we've now established a baseline, and we have that dedicated funding for capital improvements that can now be used to help offset some of these costs. So that's really one of the main drivers here, but why you're seeing this now. And then the second point, something I know is near and dear to my colleagues' hearts here up on council. In addition to these council workshops, the community, the public meetings will obviously be open to all of you so that you can kind of see how the sausage is made if you want to engage with residents as well, and look for some two-way feedback there. So just wanted to open that up, or just make sure that everybody was aware of that as well, just so that should help the kind of comfort level as we move through this process. So with that, any questions or comments from council? I guess that's a good job.
Thank you.
All right, hearing none, that is the only item on the agenda. What's the anticipated next time that council would see this based on that timeline? Meaning, have we talked a little bit about periodic updates?
We have
What's
talked
sort of
about, we have discussed periodic updates, but
Okay.
I'll defer to you, Mr. Chairman, and the mayor to decide when we come back before council.
All right. I know, certainly as part of the timeline you just shared, we talked about June, July for council workshops. However, in the discussions that we've had with Mr. Chair, Director Burry, Director Vollmer, Ms. Six, and myself, we were looking to create an internal committee with Council President Renner as well, being on that steering committee, and then working through dates with the two of them as to when and how we would keep council updated between now and the workshops in June and July. Whether those are periodic finance committee meetings, whatever that look like, I think that'd be something we would do in concert with council leadership.
Okay, so TBD. All right.
I do have something.
Yeah, Ms. Angela.
In terms of all of the infrastructure monies coming from the federal government, and I know you're aware of all those, and do you see that fitting in to your timeline to be able to get some of those, I guess, grants or whatever? Because it's like the first time that there's so much money out there for this to happen. So.
Our plan would certainly be to work with Joanne and the mayor's office to determine what makes the most sense from an infrastructure funding standpoint from that bill.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming in for the presentation. Quick question, I think you touched on it towards the beginning, but and maybe this is better for the mayor and the administration, but sort of Mr. Schnetzer's question about the periodic updates sort of brought it to my mind. We talk about the relationship with our current facilities workshops and the interplay here, that relationship and sort of self-informing one another, if that makes sense.
Do you mean how those two play together?
Yes.
So the facilities workshop, I think, I would call them maybe a subset of the CIP. So until, the whole purpose of doing the facilities workshops is to work with council to prioritize how we are going to deal with the three facilities that really have been the subject of those workshops. The PD headquarters, the ops complex, and potentially whatever happens with City Hall. In order to prioritize them and place them into the capital improvement plan, we need to know what priority council's placing with those three facilities and how you are prioritizing those and see us moving a path forward. That then gets rolled into the placement and prioritization of all of the other capital projects. But to just kind of address those in the midst of bridges and intersections and all those things that would get lost. So we carved out the facilities as a separate discussion to get direction on that to then incorporate into the capital improvement plan as that gets formulated. Does that make sense?
That makes sense and helps sort of level set, so I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anything else from council? Any closing remarks from the administration?
No, we're throwing a lot of workshops at you this year, aren't we? It's a great opportunity to continue to work together and the collaboration as we set the path forward for Gahanna. Councilman Schnetzer, I appreciate your comments earlier about, why now and why the CIP now. We have issue $12. There were a lot of promises made to residents back in 2019 when they put their faith in council and the administration to make that investment. And this holds us accountable to how we're going to spend those dollars. But we do it in a responsible, managed way. And really, that's what the ultimate goal of this plan would be.
All right, thanks, everybody. Thus concludes finance.
Thank you.
Thank you.